I'm here today to share the story of Sanjeev Bhatt. Mr. Sanjeev Bhatt, a former officer in the Indian Police Service, is the primary witness and whistleblower to the Gujarat state government's complicit role in the 2002 pogroms, in which thousands of people, mostly Muslims, were killed and injured in horrific communal riots. For over 2 decades, Sanjeev Bhatt has been vindictively victimized and persecuted by the Modi government for not buckling under political pressure and for daring to speak the truth. The judicial persecution of Mr. Bhatt started in 2009 when he first deposed before the Supreme Court appointed special investigation team that was tasked with investigating the violence. The persecution escalated with his deposition before the Nanavati Mehta Commission, which was established to investigate the state's complicity in the 2002 pogrom, as well as his submission of a 2011 affidavit to the Indian Supreme Court and the National Commission of Minorities. In these testimonies, Mr. Bhatt implicated Narendra Modi, who was then the chief minister of Gujarat, as well as various other state functionaries in the 2002 anti-Muslim violence. Mr. Bhatt's willingness to speak the truth resulted in his suspension and subsequent dismissal from the Indian Police Service under frivolous grounds of, quote, unauthorized absence from duty, an absence that was caused by his legal obligation to appear and depose before the Nanavati Mehta Commission. However, suspending Mr. Bhatt, dismissing him, unlawfully detaining him for having filed an affidavit, withdrawing his security protection, and unlawfully breaking down his home wasn't enough. On September 5th, 2018, he was detained under the false pretext of questioning in a 3-decade-old case with the sole purpose and intent of silencing and discrediting his voice once and for all. In an attempt to permanently silence and discredit the only person who can link Narendra Modi to the 2002 violence, in a gross miscarriage of justice, Mr. Bhatt was maliciously framed in a 3-decades-old fabricated case, convicted to life imprisonment for a crime he did not commit. In 2018, 2 cases, one 30 years old and the other 26 years old, both of which had previously been investigated, closed, and stayed by the courts, were unlawfully reopened by lower courts in Gujarat at the behest of Narendra Modi and Home Minister Amit Shah, and Sanjeev Bhatt was put under arrest without any documentation or judicial order. It's important to note that in India, for police officers and other public servants to be prosecuted, a sanction to prosecute is required to pursue legal charges. If the sanction has been rejected by the government, it cannot be subjected to review by any other court of law. In 1990, the Gujarati government had refused to give the sanction to prosecute in this case as the investigation was conducted and closed without any wrongdoing on Mr. Bhatt's part. Thus, this trial in 2018 was proceeded without the appropriate jurisdiction in a blatant violation of due process and basic human rights. Despite Mr. Bhatt's lawyers submitting the stay orders that had been issued in the original case in the 1990s, the court refused to take this evidence into consideration and allowed the Gujarat government to take custody of Mr. Bhatt for whistleblowing. Since 2018, when he was unlawfully detained and subsequently put under arrest, we have seen systematic transfers and special appointments of judges to ensure that Mr. Bhatt is discredited and silenced at all costs. On more than 16 occasions, when his case was listed before judges who would not blindly follow the Modi government's orders, the benches were shuffled the very next day to ensure that the case would be heard by judges keen to act at the government's behest. Any legal officer or judge who tried to dispatch their duty with honesty was immediately punished, while judges who acted at the behest of the government were immediately rewarded with promotions and elevation to favorable positions. One such example was Judicial Magistrate V.R. Charan, who in 2018 refused to turn over Mr. Bhatt to the police, stating that, quote, there is no justifiable ground to grant police remand as the case in question was investigated and closed in 1995. She dismissed the matter, allowing him to apply for bail the next day. However, this ruling was labeled as a, quote, act of insubordination, and she was immediately transferred overnight. A new judge, D.M. Vyas, was specially appointed in her place to hear the matter, and her ruling was overturned the next day. This is just one chilling example of how the Indian judiciary is used as a puppet machinery by the Modi regime to ensure that the voices of truth and dissent are shackled and silenced. The state judiciary not only falsely framed Mr. Bhatt on trumped-up charges, but expeditiously conducted the entire trial in his absence, in a farce trial conducted ex parte. When his lawyers requested the court to summon a forensic medicine expert as a defense witness, the court ordered the witness to appear within the next 2 hours, despite the fact they knew the witness lived in an entirely different part of the country and would require at least a day's notice to make the commute. Subsequently, Mr. Butt's team was not allowed to call in a single defense witness or cross-examine the prosecution witnesses. Throughout the trial, the Sessions Court judge fell asleep in open court, and in gross violation of due process, not only blatantly tutored the prosecution witnesses in open court, but also changed the dictation of the testimony to fit the prosecution's fanciful narrative. Ultimately, despite there being no evidence to support the prosecution's allegations in a 30-year-old case that had already been closed, the lower Sessions Court sentenced Mr. Butt to life imprisonment for a crime he did not commit. Once the court convicted him, the judge refused to release the judgment and kept delaying it day after day to ensure that Mr. Butt was not immediately able to challenge the judgment in higher courts. The judge, D.M. Vyas, who had been specially appointed to hear this matter, was immediately rewarded with a promotion to be Law Secretary of Gujarat. On receiving this judgment, finally, Mr. Butt's lawyers filed a special leave petition in the Supreme Court of India challenging the sham trial and the subsequent order for life imprisonment, which was not only based on faulty legal assumptions, but was also even passed illegally without the court having the appropriate sanction to prosecute. Since 2018 and 2019, the petitions filed by Mr. Butt's lawyers in the Supreme Court of India have not been numbered or listed. It's now been 3.5 years since his review petition challenging the vitiated trial has remained in the Supreme Court registry without being numbered. This is not just unprecedented, but absolutely and entirely unheard of. Systematically, all of Mr. Butt's appeals in the Gujarat High Court were only listed before the bench of Justice Bela Trivedi, who is famously sympathetic to Narendra Modi and Amit Shah. Finally, after much delay, when his appeal for bail was finally listed before Justice Trivedi, in an absolute mockery of due process rights, she declared in open court that she would give his lawyers only 5 minutes to argue for his bail. When his lawyers protested this egregious decision, the judge decided to deny bail without even hearing any arguments. She was immediately rewarded with an elevation to the Supreme Court of India, where she currently serves, superseding a dozen of her seniors. For the last 3.5 years, Mr. Sanjeev Butt have been fighting to get just one fair day in court after years of relentless persecution for blowing the whistle on the Gujarat government and Narendra Modi's complicity in the 2002 violence. Until the Indian judiciary is held accountable for their complicit role in the government's attempts to silence and shackle every honest voice holding the regime accountable for their crimes, Indian democracy and defenders of justice and human rights like Mr. Butt will continue to be victimized by the judiciary at the behest of the governing regime. Thank you.